Director, the moon is gone.
Track every fragment. What are we looking at?
Those aren't natural debris. There's something inside the moon.
My God.
It was never a moon.
Assuming the destruction of our moon would shatter our spirit, the Armada intended to force humanity to its knees with a cosmic display of power. However, as the lunar dust settled, the alien fleet heard no screams of terror. Instead, they heard the sound of chains snapping. By shattering our satellite, they had inadvertently broken our cage. The end of the world as we knew it didn't begin with a declaration of war. It began with an anomaly detected by the James Webb Space Telescope, quickly corroborated by private arrays leased to the Department of Defense by SpaceX and Lockheed Martin. For 72 hours, the world's top brass sat in subterranean bunkers, watching a fleet of impossibly massive vessels decelerate past the Oort cloud. At United States Space Command in Colorado Springs, Director Arthur Penhaligon stood before the primary tactical display. He was a man who had spent 30 years preparing for theoretical threats, but the sheer scale of the Armada rendering on the screen made his mouth go dry. The lead vessel alone was the size of Manhattan. There were no radio transmissions, no attempts at contact, neither mathematical nor linguistic. They simply arrived. Telemetry from the Aegis space platforms is coming in, reported Sarah Jenkins, the lead orbital tracking technician, her voice remarkably steady despite the slight tremble in her hands. They are bypassing our defensive satellites. They aren't even powering up their point defense networks. Director, they are completely ignoring our orbital infrastructure. Are they targeting the surface? Arthur asked, his eyes locked on the projected trajectories. Negative, Sarah whispered, her fingers flying across her console. They're entering a high orbit around the moon. Director, they are forming a perimeter around the lunar surface. Nobody in the command center breathed. Why the moon? It held only a few multinational research outposts and a couple of commercial helium-3 mining rigs operated by General Dynamics. It held zero tactical value for an invading force. The alien commander, whose translated title would later be known to humanity as the Fleet Overseer, made a calculated, devastating decision. To conquer a species without expending ground troops, you must first break their minds. You must show them a power so absolute, so incomprehensibly vast, that resistance becomes a mathematical impossibility. At exactly 0400 hours Eastern Standard Time, the Armada opened fire. They didn't use kinetic bombardment or nuclear warheads. It was a localized emission of exotic matter, a beam of absolute darkness laced with blinding violet energy. It struck the center of Mare Tranquillitatis. From Earth, it looked as though the sky had caught fire. A brilliant, agonizing flash turned night into day across the Western Hemisphere. Billions of people rushed from their homes, staring upward in blind terror. Through the atmospheric distortion, the impossible happened. The moon, humanity's constant companion for billions of years, the celestial body that guided our tides and inspired our myths, began to crack. Deep, molten fissures raced across the lunar surface like veins of glowing lava. Then, in complete, horrifying silence, the moon shattered. Back in the command center, the screens went white with sensor overload. Arthur gripped the edge of his command table so hard his knuckles turned white. "Report!" he barked, his voice cracking. "Give me a goddamn damage assessment." "The moon is... it's gone, sir," Sarah stammered, tears freely spilling down her cheeks. "Massive fragmentation. The core has detonated. Debris is expanding outward at 40 kilometers per second." The immediate panic in the room was palpable. "Calculate the trajectory of the debris field," Arthur yelled over the rising din. "We need to know when the meteor shower hits. Get FEMA on the line. Contact the president. If those chunks hit the atmosphere, we're looking at an extinction-level event." However, as the hours ticked by, the expected apocalypse didn't happen. The tides went completely feral. Coastal cities from Miami to Mumbai experienced devastating surges that swallowed entire shorelines. But the sky didn't fall. Dr. Evelyn Reed, a senior astrophysicist stationed at the Keck Observatory in Hawaii, was staring at her monitors in a state of absolute shock. The debris from the shattered moon wasn't raining down on Earth. It was caught in a bizarre, artificial suspension. The massive chunks of rock and regolith were hovering in the vacuum. trapped in a lattice of residual energy that defied every known law of orbital mechanics. Arthur, Evelyn said, patching her private line directly into Space Command. Her voice was barely a whisper. Are you seeing the spectral analysis of the debris? I don't care about the composition right now, Evelyn, Arthur snapped. I care about when a continent-sized rock is going to hit the Atlantic. That's just it, Arthur. They aren't going to hit us. Look at the core fragments. Arthur brought up the visual from the Keck telemetry. In the center of the expanding, glowing dust cloud of the destroyed moon, there was something metallic, something engineered. It was a staggering superstructure, composed of interlaced rings of a dark, hyperdense metamaterial. It looked like a shattered gyroscope the size of a small planet. The moon wasn't just a natural satellite, Evelyn said, the horror dawning in her voice. Arthur, it was a shell. The alien armada didn't just blow up a rock. They shattered a containment unit. A dampening field. Dampening what? Arthur asked. Before Evelyn could answer, the first wave hit them. It started as a low-frequency hum, a vibration felt not in the ears, but in the teeth and the base of the skull. At the Keck Observatory, Evelyn dropped her headset, clutching the sides of her head as a blinding migraine spiked behind her eyes. Across the globe, from the bustling streets of London to the rural plains of the American Midwest, every single human being dropped to their knees. Cars swerved off roads, aircraft plunged from the sky as pilots lost consciousness, and the world ground to a devastating halt. The global Schumann resonance, the electromagnetic frequency of the Earth's atmosphere that normally rested at a comfortable 7.83 Hertz, had spiked violently. The shattered metallic core of the moon was no longer emitting its counterfrequency. For hundreds of thousands of years, that ancient lunar machine had been bathing Earth in a suppressive wave, locking human DNA into a dormant, restricted state. High above the Earth, aboard the flagship of the invading armada, the fleet overseer watched the telemetry with smug satisfaction. The bioscanners indicated that the primate species on the surface was experiencing catastrophic neurological failure. The shockwave of the moon's destruction, coupled with the sudden shift in gravity, was apparently tearing their primitive nervous systems apart. It was a cleaner victory than he had anticipated. Soon the cleanup crews would descend, sweep away the dying natives, and harvest the planet's rich biosphere. But the Overseer's scientists had misread the data. The humans weren't dying, they were adapting. In the subterranean bunker of Space Command, Arthur lay on the cold linoleum floor, gasping for air. His vision blurred, swimming with fractal patterns of impossible colors. He felt his heart hammering against his ribs, racing at a terrifying 200 beats per minute, yet he wasn't going into cardiac arrest. His blood felt like liquid fire, rushing oxygen to dormant sectors of his brain that had been asleep since the dawn of the species. Sarah, Arthur groaned, trying to push himself up. He didn't speak the word aloud. His lips hadn't moved. Yet, across the room, Sarah gasped and looked directly at him. Her eyes were wide, the pupils dilated to the edge of her irises. "I hear you." Her voice echoed perfectly within Arthur's mind. It wasn't a hallucination. It was crisp, clear, and carried the undeniable metallic tang of a telepathic connection. Arthur staggered to his feet. The migraine was fading, replaced by a terrifying, exhilarating clarity. He could feel the room. He could sense the electrical currents running through the walls, the steady hum of the servers, the individual heartbeats of every man and woman in the command center. He could feel the exact location of the Aegis space satellites orbiting thousands of miles above his head. Suddenly, a massive influx of voices flooded his consciousness. "Help me." "What's happening?" "My head." "I can see the air." It was a chaotic, deafening chorus of billions of minds waking up all at once. The human race, severed from the cosmic network for millennia by the lunar dampener, was suddenly forcefully reconnected. Arthur instinctively raised his hands, grasping for control. He imagined a wall, a dam holding back a raging river. To his absolute shock, the psychic noise began to dampen. He was learning to filter the input, compartmentalizing the voices. Looking around the room, he saw the rest of his staff doing the same. "Evelyn," Arthur spoke aloud this time, leaning heavily on the central console. He pulled up the communication line to Hawaii. "Evelyn, are you there?" The audio feed was dead, but in his mind, he felt a distinct, familiar presence reaching out across the Pacific Ocean. "I'm here, Arthur," Evelyn's thought projected into his consciousness, sharp and clinical. "The instruments, they're melting down, but I don't need them anymore. I can feel the magnetic field of the Earth. Arthur, the human genome is rewriting itself in real time. It's unlocking. The junk DNA, the unused 90% of our brains, it was never junk. It was sealed. Sealed by who?" Arthur thought back, feeling a surge of adrenaline that defied human biology. "I don't know," Evelyn replied. "Maybe an older race. Maybe we did it to ourselves after a cataclysm. But whoever built that machine inside the moon did it to keep us weak, to keep us blind." In orbit, the alien sensors began to scream. The biometric readings of the Earth, which had moments ago shown a dying species, were now off the charts. The planet was glowing with a localized psionic energy signature so dense it was warping the local space-time continuum. The fleet overseer slammed his fist onto his command console. "What is the meaning of this? Why are the biologicals not expiring?" "Overseer," his tactical officer stammered, staring at the incomprehensible data. "The native life forms, their energy output is multiplying exponentially. They are emitting class. 9 psionic signatures. Every single one of them." "Impossible," the overseer snarled. "They are primitive bipeds using combustion engines. Launch the pacification squads. I want the major population centers neutralized immediately. Show them the true might of the armada." Thousands of dropships detached from the massive dreadnoughts, plummeting toward the Earth's atmosphere like a rain of steel meteors. They were loaded with heavy shock troops, 7-foot-tall, cybernetically enhanced warriors bred for absolute slaughter, armed with plasma casters that could melt a tank into slag. They expected to land in the ashes of a broken world, stepping over the weeping, terrified remnants of a fragile species. They had no idea what was waiting for them. The alien dropships tore through the stratosphere, their heat shields glowing white-hot. They targeted the political and military hearts of humanity: Washington, D.C., London, Tokyo, Beijing. In Washington, the sky darkened as 3 massive vessels hovered over the National Mall. The sheer anti-gravity wash from their engines flattened trees and blew out the windows of the Smithsonian. The ramps descended with a heavy, mechanical grind, and the alien shock troops marched out. They were encased in sleek, black kinetic armor, their visors glowing with a sinister crimson light. Michael Holden, a former Marine and current private security contractor, had been jogging near the Lincoln Memorial when the moon exploded. He had survived the devastating psychic migraine by crawling under a stone bench, vomiting until his stomach was empty. Now he stood in the center of the mall, dirt staining his athletic clothes, watching the alien giants deploy. He wasn't alone. Dozens of survivors were emerging from the rubble of nearby buildings. Before today, they would have been a terrified, disorganized mob, scattering like insects before the boots of an invader. But today, there was no panic. Michael looked at a woman standing 30 yards away. She was a barista, her apron torn and dusty. He looked at a suited politician emerging from the shadow of the monument. He didn't say a word to them, but they moved in perfect, synchronized harmony. A silent, instinctive tactical network had formed between them. "They want to cull us," Michael thought, broadcasting the intent to the surrounding humans. "Let them try," the collective response echoed in his mind, cold and hard as steel. An alien squad leader, noticing the group of humans standing defiantly in the open, raised his plasma caster. He aimed directly at Michael's chest, intending to make an example of the primitive. He pulled the trigger. A bolt of superheated plasma, burning at 10,000 degrees, erupted from the barrel. It should have instantly vaporized Michael, but time seemed to slow down. Michael didn't dive out of the way. He didn't even flinch. He simply felt the kinetic energy of the incoming projectile, perceived its atomic structure, and raised his hand. 50 feet from Michael, the plasma bolt hit an invisible wall. It flattened out, sparking and hissing, the thermal energy bleeding harmlessly into the surrounding air. The alien squad leader froze. He tapped the side of his weapon, assuming a malfunction, and fired again. 3 more bolts of plasma screamed toward the crowd. This time, the barista stepped forward. She didn't raise her hands, she just glared at the incoming fire. The plasma bolts stopped dead in midair, suspended like flies in amber. With a sharp tilt of her head, the bolts reversed trajectory, flying back at the aliens with twice their original velocity. The plasma struck the front line of shock troops, bypassing their kinetic shields completely because the shields were designed to stop physical velocity, not psionically accelerated matter. The aliens were thrown backward, their black armor melting and warping. Michael felt a surge of power course through his veins, an ancient, terrifying instinct waking up from its genetic slumber. He looked at the massive dropship hovering above them, a vessel weighing thousands of tons. He reached out with his mind, feeling the cold metal, the intricate wiring, the anti-gravity engines keeping it aloft. He didn't just feel it. He felt the minds of the other humans linking with his. Their collective willpower pooled into a massive, invisible battering ram. "Bring it down," Michael commanded the network. Every human on the mall focused their attention on the dropship. In orbit, the alien sensors recorded an unprecedented spike in localized gravity manipulation. The anti-gravity engines of the dropship screamed, whining as they tried to compensate for a force that wasn't supposed to exist. The metal hull groaned. Support struts snapped like dry twigs. With a deafening crunch, the invisible psychic grip of 50 untrained, newly awakened humans crushed the dropship's engines. The massive vessel dropped out of the sky like a stone, crashing into the reflecting pool with a catastrophic explosion of water and debris. A heavy, terrifying silence fell over the mall. The surviving alien shock troops slowly backed away, their weapons trembling in their hands. They looked at the humans, these fragile, unarmored bipeds in dirty clothes, and realized they were not facing a primitive species. They were facing apex predators. Up in Space Command, Arthur watched the satellite feeds coming in from across the globe. He was seeing the same impossible scenes repeated in every major city. In Tokyo, a group of businessmen and students were generating a localized electromagnetic pulse that shorted out an entire squadron of alien fighters. In London, civilians were ripping the kinetic armor off the invaders using nothing but telekinesis, dismantling the troops with brutal, surgical precision. "Director," Sarah whispered, her mind broadcasting a mix of awe and terror. "They aren't even using the military. The civilians. They are tearing the invaders apart with their bare minds." Arthur looked at the fragmented telemetry of the destroyed moon. The ancient dampening field was completely gone. "Get me a direct transmission to the alien flagship," Arthur ordered, his voice steady. He wasn't asking for radio capability. He was asking Sarah to use the Aegis space arrays to punch a communication laser directly into the hull of the enemy vessel, carrying an audio payload. "Channel is open, Director," Sarah said, tapping her temple. Arthur stood tall, projecting his voice not just through the microphone, but wrapping it in the sheer, suffocating psychic weight of his newly awakened mind. He aimed it squarely at the alien commander. To the commander of the invading fleet, Arthur spoke, his voice booming through the bridge of the alien flagship, causing the overseer and his crew to drop to their knees in agony. "You thought you were breaking our defenses by destroying the moon. You didn't realize what that satellite actually was." Arthur paused, letting the telepathic pressure build, ensuring the aliens felt every ounce of the terrifying potential humanity had just unlocked. "You didn't destroy our shield. You destroyed our prison. And for that, we thank you. Now, get the hell off our planet." The overseer, blood dripping from his auditory receptors, stared at the view screen in absolute horror. The blue jewel of Earth was no longer a ripe fruit waiting to be plucked. It was a glowing, angry hornet's nest, radiating a power that the galaxy hadn't seen in millions of years. The aliens had made the greatest tactical error in the history of the cosmos. They had broken the seal on humanity, and humanity was very, very angry. Aboard the alien flagship, the Spear of Dawn, the atmosphere had abruptly shifted from arrogant triumph to suffocating, cold dread. The fleet overseer stood completely paralyzed before the primary tactical view screen. The biometric readouts of the blue planet below were no longer just spiking chaotically. They were harmonizing. Billions of distinct, seemingly disorganized biological signatures were rapidly weaving together into a synchronized, planet-wide neural network. The raw energy output of this collective consciousness was so immense that it was physically distorting the sensor arrays of the alien vessels. "Reroute all auxiliary power to the kinetic barriers," the overseer shouted, his voice trembling noticeably for the first time in his 3 centuries of military command. "Navigation. Calculate an immediate hyperspace jump vector to the homeworld. We are aborting the harvest. I repeat, abort the harvest." Before the navigation officer could input the command, the ship's chief archivist, a frail, multi-limbed alien whose sole duty was to maintain the fleet's historical and anthropological databases, scrambled frantically to the command dais. He was clutching a glowing, translucent data pad to his chest, his compound eyes wide with a terror that transcended their immediate tactical disaster. "Overseer, you must see this immediately," the archivist gasped, his vocal manipulators clicking in distress. When the lunar dampener shattered, our deep space sensors captured the complete, unbound genetic sequence of the native bipeds. I ran their unsealed DNA structure through the deep antiquity archives, the pre-Federation records. The overseer snatched the datapad. The screen displayed the human double helix, but it was overlaid with an ancient, glowing red sigil, a forbidden warning glyph used by the precursor races millions of years ago, a symbol synonymous with galactic extinction. "What exactly am I looking at?" the overseer demanded, his blood running cold. "They are not a young, developing species, overseer," the archivist whispered, shrinking back from the glaring screen. The ancient text spoke of a cosmic anomaly, a plague of the mind. They were a race of apex predators that consumed the galaxy not through industrialization or technology, but through sheer, unbound psionic force. The precursors couldn't exterminate them. They were too adaptable, too resilient. So, they locked them away in a temporal quarantine. The archivist pointed a trembling digit at the shattered telemetry of Earth's moon. They placed a dampening engine in orbit around their homeworld to strip them of their power, burying their true nature in forced evolutionary regression. "We didn't discover a primitive world, overseer. We found the cage of the ancestors." The overseer looked down at Earth, the color draining from his face. "And we just kicked the door wide open." The corporate awakening. Down on the surface, the immediate aftermath of the invasion attempt was not a scene of human panic, but of chilling, hyper-efficient adaptation. The remnants of the downed alien dropships were already being dismantled. Humanity didn't need heavy machinery or localized lasers. They used the focused willpower of newly awakened citizens and civilian contractors. At a heavily fortified Raytheon Advanced Defense Facility in Waltham, Massachusetts, lead aerospace engineer Gregory Miller stood in front of a mangled, smoking chunk of alien propulsion plating recovered from a crashed scout ship. Just an hour ago, Gregory would have required a dedicated team of metallurgists, state-of-the-art electron microscopes, and months of federal funding to even begin analyzing the outer hull material. Now, he simply stepped past the safety barricades, removed his protective gloves, and pressed his bare palm against the cold, dark metal. He didn't need a microscope. He could literally feel the atomic structure vibrating against his skin. He closed his eyes, sensing the intricate lattice of exotic matter and the sluggish flow of residual plasma energy trapped within the containment cells. "It's a localized gravity displacement matrix," Gregory spoke aloud. He wasn't just talking to the room. He was actively broadcasting the thought directly into the minds of his entire engineering team via the telepathic web that had organically formed among them. The data transfer was instantaneous and perfectly understood. Through the psionic network, the Raytheon engineers rapidly cataloged the alien technology's flaws. Energy inefficiency. The aliens used brute force computational algorithms to stabilize the gravity field. Structural vulnerability. The hull plating relied on rigid, kinetic barriers that were highly susceptible to telekinetic torsion. Biological disconnect. The alien ships required manual piloting, leaving a devastating lag between thought and mechanical action. The precognitive engine. Across the country, at the headquarters of Palantir Technologies in Denver, Colorado, an even more profound transformation was occurring. CEO Alexander Karp had just ordered a complete, immediate shutdown of their traditional, multi-billion-dollar data centers. They didn't need silicon processors anymore. A senior data analyst named Robert Hayes sat in the exact center of the vast Palantir operations floor. He wasn't typing on a keyboard or staring at a monitor. He was floating 4 inches off his ergonomic chair, his eyes closed, his mind acting as a living biological router. He was directly interfacing with the Department of Defense's tactical network. The predictive algorithms Palantir had spent decades perfecting were instantly rendered obsolete by genuine human precognition. Robert could physically see the alien fleet's tactical movements 5 minutes before the alien commanders even vocalized their orders. Space Command. Robert's voice echoed directly into the mind of Director Arthur Penhaligon inside the subterranean bunker in Colorado Springs. This is Palantir Actual. We have achieved a full neural sync with the surviving Aegis space platforms. The alien fleet is powering up their faster-than-light drives. They are terrified. They are attempting to flee the system. The anchor. In his bunker, Arthur opened his eyes. The debilitating migraine from the initial awakening was entirely gone, replaced by a cold, terrifying, and absolute clarity. He looked across the command table at Sarah Jenkins, who was already coordinating with global military leaders not through encrypted radios, but through instant, unhackable telepathic channels. "They came to our home," Arthur said, his voice deadly quiet, resonating with a newfound physical weight. "They shattered our sky, tried to slaughter our people in the streets, and now they want to run?" "Sir, the telemetry from Palantir confirms it," Sarah said aloud, maintaining a semblance of military protocol despite the deeply surreal circumstances. "Massive exotic energy spikes detected in the Armada's core reactors. They are tearing a localized hole in spacetime. If they jump, we lose them permanently." "We are not letting them leave," Arthur stated, stepping away from the console. "They broke the cage. Now they have to deal with what's inside." Arthur reached out with his mind, projecting his consciousness up and out, spreading it across the globe like a massive net. He didn't just speak to the allied militaries. He spoke to every single human being on the planet. He tapped into the unified, thrumming network of 8 billion awakened souls. Citizens of Earth. Arthur's thought resonated, clear as a ringing bell in the minds of a barista in Washington, a farmer in Ukraine, a Raytheon technician in Massachusetts, and a child in Tokyo. The invaders are attempting to retreat. They possess the technology to repair our shattered orbit. They possess the answers to our stolen past. I am asking for your strength. Focus your minds on the sky. Anchor them. In orbit, the alien armada's hyperspace engines reached critical mass. The fabric of spacetime began to warp and tear around the massive vessels, bleeding Cherenkov radiation into the vacuum of space. Jump coordinates locked. The tactical officer aboard the flagship reported frantically, executing hyperspace translation. Now, the overseer braced himself for the familiar, stomach-churning lurch of faster-than-light travel. The engines roared, the space-time tear opened, and the fleet surged forward. Then, they stopped. It wasn't a mechanical failure. The engines were burning at maximum output, consuming the energy equivalent of a small star, thrusting the ships forward with unimaginable force. Yet, the Armada remained perfectly stationary in high Earth orbit. "Report!" the overseer screamed, watching the structural integrity alarms flash red across his command console. "Why haven't we translated?" "Overseer," the navigation officer choked out, his mandibles clicking in terror. We are being held." "By what? A tractor beam? We scanned their orbital defenses. They have nothing capable of this." "Not a beam, sir. It's a localized gravity well. But it's not mechanical. It's biological." Down on the surface of the Earth, 8 billion human beings stood still. Cars were abandoned in the streets. Factories went silent. In the ruins of the Washington National Mall, Michael Holden and the survivors who had crushed the dropship were staring up at the daytime sky. They weren't just looking at the stars, they were reaching into the heavens. An invisible, unbreakable web of pure psionic will had wrapped itself around the alien armada. The combined focused intent of the human race was bending the laws of physics. The aliens were trying to punch a hole through reality with their engines, but humanity was collectively holding the door shut. The physical strain was immense. Arthur's nose began to bleed in the command center, but he didn't waver. Pull them down. The collective voice of humanity echoed through the psionic web. It was a sound that shook the very foundation of the alien ships, a primal, terrifying roar of a species claiming its rightful place in the cosmos. The alien flagship groaned in agony. Thick, hyper-dense armor plates began to buckle under the sheer, crushing weight of human willpower. "They are tearing the ship apart," the overseer cried out. "Shut down the FTL drives. If we keep pushing against this force, the reactor will breach." The glowing blue rings of the alien engines flickered and died. The massive armada, defeated not by lasers or missiles, but by the mind of a species they had sought to exterminate, hung helplessly in the void. At a classified Blue Origin launch site in West Texas, an experimental heavy-lift rocket, the New Glenn V, sat on the pad. It was originally designed to carry commercial payloads to the now-destroyed moon. Today, it was being repurposed. A team of engineers, using their newfound telekinetic abilities, had spent the last 2 hours surgically grafting the anti-gravity engine from a downed alien fighter onto the rocket's chassis. It was crude, it was dangerous, and it bypassed a decade of safety testing. Michael Holden, having been airlifted from D.C. by a military transport that was literally carried across the country by a relay of telekinetic pilots strapped into the command module of the rocket, he was joined by a squad of Special Forces operators, none of whom carried conventional firearms. They didn't need them. Launch sequence initiated. The Blue Origin flight director's thought resonated in Michael's mind. No fuel required. You are clear for psionic liftoff. Michael closed his eyes. He felt the cold metal of the alien drive beneath him. He synchronized his breathing with the 8 men strapped in behind him. Together, they imagined upward momentum. The massive rocket didn't ignite. There was no smoke, no fire, no deafening roar. It simply lifted off the pad, accelerating instantly to Mach 10, completely ignoring atmospheric friction through a telekinetically generated aerodynamic shield. It shot into the upper atmosphere like a silent silver bullet, aimed directly at the alien flagship. Aboard the Spear of Dawn, the sensors shrieked. "Incoming vessel," the tactical officer yelled. "It's moving too fast! Impact in 3 seconds!" The overseer braced for an explosion, but the human vessel didn't crash into them. Using the alien anti-gravity drive and their own psionic dampening, Michael and his team matched the orbital velocity of the flagship perfectly, slamming the nose of their rocket gently against the alien dreadnought's primary airlock. There was no need for explosive breaching charges. Michael simply stepped out of the command module, pressed his hand against the alien airlock, and violently expanded the molecular bonds of the metal. The massive steel doors shattered outward like fragile glass. The human boarding party stepped onto the pristine deck of the alien flagship. They wore no spacesuits. They had simply willed a bubble of oxygen to surround them, held in place by telekinetic tension. A squad of elite alien guards rushed down the corridor, leveling their plasma casters. Michael didn't break stride. He looked at the guards. He felt the electrical impulses traveling from their brains to their trigger fingers. With a surgical, precise thought, he severed those impulses. The alien guards collapsed to the floor, completely paralyzed but entirely conscious, their weapons clattering uselessly to the deck. The humans walked through the flagship as if they owned it. Any bulkheads in their way were simply parted like curtains. Any resistance was neutralized before it could even begin. They weren't just fighting. They were demonstrating absolute, unassailable dominance. Within minutes, the heavy blast doors of the bridge were ripped off their hinges, floating harmlessly to the side. Michael stepped onto the bridge, his eyes glowing with a faint, residual violet energy. The remaining bridge crew backed away in terror. The overseer, stripped of his arrogance, fell to his knees. He looked up at the humans, seeing not a primitive primate, but the ancient terror of the galaxy made flesh. Michael looked down at the overseer. He didn't speak the alien's language, but the telepathic projection was crystal clear, translating the sheer weight of human authority directly into the overseer's mind. "You came to our world to burn it," Michael's voice echoed in the alien's skull, cold and immovable. "You thought you were gods. But you only broke the lock on our cage, and now this fleet belongs to us. Back at Space Command, Arthur watched the biometric feeds of the alien bridge stabilize. The boarding party had taken control. Evelyn Reed's voice echoed in the command center, patching through from Hawaii. Arthur, she thought, her mental tone a mix of awe and grim determination. I've finished the preliminary analysis of their databanks. The moon wasn't the only one. There are thousands of worlds out there, thousands of species. And from what I'm seeing, the precursor race that locked us away, they're still out there. They run the Federation that this fleet belongs to. Arthur looked up at the main tactical screen, which now displayed a starry map of the local galactic arm, downloaded directly from the flagship's nav computer. They locked us away because they were afraid of us, Arthur said aloud, a grim smile touching the corners of his mouth. They stole our birthright. They stole the stars from us for millions of years. What are your orders, Director? Sarah asked, standing beside him, her own eyes reflecting the starlight from the monitors. Arthur took a deep breath, feeling the pulse of 8 billion minds waiting for a direction, waiting for a purpose. They were no longer divided by borders, politics, or petty terrestrial squabbles. The crucible of the alien invasion had forged them into a single, terrifyingly unified entity. The Terran ascendancy had been born in the fires of a shattered moon. Tell Raytheon and Lockheed to start mobilizing, Arthur ordered, his voice echoing with absolute authority. I want human crews integrated into every captured ship in that armada by the end of the week. We're going to reverse engineer their technology, fuse it with our psionics, and rebuild our fleet. He looked back at the galactic map, at the thousands of inhabited worlds blissfully unaware that the ancient apex predator had finally woken up. They brought the war to our doorstep, Arthur said softly. Now we bring it to theirs. Let's go remind the galaxy why they were so afraid of the dark. If you enjoyed this HFY story of humanity breaking its ancient chains, smash that like button and subscribe for more sci-fi dramas. The aliens thought they were wiping us out, but they just woke up the galaxy's worst nightmare. What did you think of the twist about our moon being a prison? Let me know in the comments below. Share this video with your fellow sci-fi fans, and turn on notifications so you never miss an epic tale.